Okay, perfect. So Jack, if you just want to start off by telling me a little bit about kind of yourself, what you do, and I know you're a little bit of everywhere, so I'd love to hear what you consider as your area of expertise.
Cool. Megan, first of all, thanks a lot for this opportunity. So at this point in my career, I have become a dad. I have a little 5-year-old boy, which I think is always probably the most defining thing of who I am. I've ran and helped other people start companies. Typically, I fill finance and operations positions. But at this point, I've really dedicated most of my time to being like a mentor and an advisor for startups. I'm still operational. I'm a partner in a company called Azuna, which is an all-natural cleaning product line, which is unlike anything I've always done, right? But I wanted to try something new, and I kind of fell in love with the founder. I do that a lot. And I'm also a really active angel investor and board contributor, I guess would be a good way to put it. So I spend a lot of time with startups, both in the area and outside the area. Most of my experience has been in marketplace startups. I have a particular soft spot for ag tech and environmentally friendly products and services. And I also still dabble a little bit in a family business that my father's in.
So definitely a little bit of everywhere.
Yeah, they're busy days.
Good. So, I mean, you're across such a broad spectrum of different industries and different job titles and everything. So I'm curious to kind of hear about what your experience is with workforce. So just give me like a breakdown of like age group wise, what do you typically work with? Is that changing, or are you always kind of within one generation?
No, I mean, I've always operated throughout the stack. So I started my career, my professional career in venture capital back in 2008 when I graduated from business school. And I was the youngest guy by 10 years, really to the guys that were senior to me by about 40 years in the firm I was in. I was in my 20s, they were in their 60s. And I think I operate and connect well with, individuals along the entire spectrum. I intentionally try and do it, my 4 largest investors, the founders are, mid 50s, mid 40s. At the time I got in, late 20s and late 30s. So, I mean, again, full stack there. The workforces I work with, it's full. It's pretty much everything. I was one of the co-founders over at ACV, and there I ran operation and finance till I left. And I was working with people 10 years, 20 years older than me, that 10, 15 years younger than me. All different backgrounds and skill sets. I'm a pretty adaptable guy. I can drive, a beat up car into a nice restaurant and people don't think I'm out of place probably in either situation. Entire stack of ages, backgrounds. I've done work all over the globe. Asia, Europe, US, a little bit of Africa. So happy to talk whatever you want to discuss on that.
So when you're looking at all those different age groups that you have experience working with, I'd love to hear what your biggest takeaway is in differences. So of course I can read all day what people think the difference between all the different generational groups are, but nothing beats actually hearing it from someone who's interacting with them all day. I'd love to see kind of like when you're in a meeting and there's every generation represented, what do you kind of notice right away or know is going to happen with the differences in those different age groups?
So so where we sit today, there's been some standardization, right? I mean, we're all virtual. So before I could say, hey, some people want to be in person, some people don't. We're all virtual right now. When I'm in meetings and I'm running them, I try and keep them pretty homogenous to one another. So I can no longer do like no electronic devices. That was my big thing, was like everybody comes in, you can bring a notepad, you can bring whatever. When I was at ACV, everybody got a little notepad or we would pay for one for them. But like I tried to standardize things and, I wouldn't really put it into age, I think culture and background and personality have as much to do with anything. I would say I'm not super astute, but I do appreciate the nuances of personality. I started doing this, learning about this thing called Enneagram, which is like 9 different personality types. And I try and learn as much as I can to what makes people tick, because that's what makes us who we are, right? Our personalities are the armor to our careers. So, when it comes to age, like, yeah, it's easy to sit here and be like, oh, millennials all want to run the world, but none of them want to work that hard. Or, my grandparents' generation, that was the greatest generation, then birthed probably the least great generation. We recently had some of those people in, high-ranking offices, and it's really easy to critique those people. But, when it comes to what it's like working with workforce, a lot of it, I think I have an unfair advantage to always having worked with great people, because I typically have been in decision-making role of who gets hired. And so, like, I always hired off happiness. I hired off personality, aptitude more than a specific skill set. I didn't care if you knew how to use the whole Microsoft suite or if you knew Tableau. I cared that you were detail-oriented and caring and appreciated what other people were going through. So in some ways that has pre-screened out a lot of probably the anomalies that maybe you have to work with, like not getting to pick the people around you. But I think I tend to pick people that have some common threads, and those resonate through the entire organization.
So what I'm really curious about is how you've noticed a shift. So the kind of leadership style that you're explaining that you like to have seems like, at least from me loving to study things and read research and trends and things, it seems like that's really the direction a lot of companies are going in leadership. There's definitely that like more socially conscious, more personality based and human based conscious type leadership style. I'm wondering, from when you entered the workforce to today, have you noticed those trends to actually be happening? Are things really shifting in that direction, or do you think it's still very leader dependent?
Again, my experience has primarily been in startups, which are smaller organizations. People are not typically comped at highly competitive levels. So like they got to want to be there. They got to believe in the mission. Have I seen a change? Yeah, I would say there's been a change, but there's also been a change with the type of companies I've worked with, right? You're talking to a guy who's got his fingerprints on at least 7 dozen different companies. Like I think I'm in the 80s or 90s. I used to keep track of it. Like when I was at Trillium, which was the first venture group that I worked with, right? I was working with 20 different companies at a time. That was for like my first 4 or 5 years. And then when I became like an independent, like fundless VC, I probably worked with a different set of 15 or 20 companies for another 4 or 5 years. And then just in the last 2 years alone, between advising and mentor work and being an angel, I'm involved with like another 100 companies. So like when you start to, and being involved does not mean a decision maker or an influencer. There's varying degrees of my involvement in them, but across the stack, I see there being changes. I typically am working with companies that move faster and quicker. They outsource more. You need to be a better communicator than you are worker sometimes. It's more about how much doesn't get lost in translation than how much you're actually adding to it. But the same core tenets that have always kind of been the bread and butter or the hallmark of a good and properly functioning organization still exists, right? Trust in the workforce hasn't changed. The ability to appreciate, what the other people around you are going through hasn't changed. It's just now it's more highlighted because I think as the world becomes more digital and more of the menial tasks get automated, we're asked to do higher functioning level things, which require more brain and less brawn. And, if I'm having a bad day, I can still swing a hammer with the rest of them. But if I'm having a crappy day, it might be harder for me to make the right decisions. And as we move more from tactical things to more strategic, you just need to be, your moral composition and your mental state needs to be stronger. So I think it's a byproduct of the work environment changing, not so much that drove the change in the work environment.
So hypothetically, say you were mentoring a company and they came to you, and I'm sure from your conversations with Jimmy, he has shared with you all of the frustrations about trying to adjust to a younger workforce. He has a lot of experience with like entry-level positions, and when younger employees are coming in and they're thinking and acting so differently and they expect so many different things from their employers now than what people necessarily used to expect. So say that you were mentoring a company and they sat down with you and they were like, we have no idea what to do. We have no idea what to do with these young employees. How do we work with them? How do we make them happy? How would you approach that? Where would you go with that? What would you suggest to them?
Well, I mean, so what you're suggesting is that the management's all old and the employees are all young.
Yeah.
I think that's problem number one. There's a couple companies out there, and I can't for the life of me tell you who they are, but let me say it this way. There are startups, like when we started ACV, Joe was like late 20s. Dan was a year older than me, so he was probably like 31 and I was 30. Three of our first four employees were in their 40s or 50s, right? I mean, so it wasn't like, hey, how do we work with these young employees? It was like, how do we work with these old employees? Right?
Yeah, you guys had the opposite problem.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem. I mean, if you've got a really top-heavy organization, which there is a homogeneity amongst them, which is completely different than your workforce, there's no relatability. There's not, right? The 55-year-old boss, sitting on his chair backwards like AC Slater trying to talk to 25-year-olds, just, it doesn't communicate. So I tell people, if you're going to look for, diversity and inclusion are big things right now. And normally that falls around sex or gender or demographic or any of that stuff. Age falls into that bucket too. You should really find some up and coming performers, and a fractional percentage of your management team should be with people that are of a similar age and background as the people that are being managed. Like at ACV, our call center at ACV had a lot of young people in it, but it also had a lot of middle-aged people in it too. And it was like, we had to make something that worked for everybody. I was really big on making sure the culture fit for everyone, right? So if that meant that we were going to celebrate every single religious holiday, then we were going to do it, right? If that meant that we were going to be, we were going to offer carte blanche to people to say hey, look, is whatever it takes for you to be in a good place with the time off that you need with your situation, right? If I'm in my late 50s and my parents are alive and they need my help, I may need more time off than if I'm in my early 20s and I'm single and don't have kids yet, right? So it's funny. I make this statement, and if you broke it out as just a soundbite, it would sound incorrect, but it's not a quality that I'm always trying to strive for. It's like fairness, right? And and I don't want it to resonate that Jack Rocco doesn't believe in equality. I just think that you need to understand and appreciate situations with humility and humanity in everything that you do. And yeah, so if that's the way the world's going, it's news to me, right? Every business that I touch, I'm influential in, probably by choice. I'm extremely abrasive, very pungent, odor that appears, right? I don't go in a room and go unnoticed. But that's if those frictional aspects, between this cleavage that exists between two different, age populations is happening, we obviously haven't mixed them together enough, right? And I don't know how you do that without literally mixing them together, So
I want to kind of move towards our predictions for the future of work. And I'm going to start off really broad here and then narrow it down, because what I found is when I just give people the broad question, they hate me because it's very difficult to answer it broadly. So let's start off with that one and then we'll kind of walk through it even more. So just give me your prediction. I haven't been able to get through one of these interviews without mentioning the insanity that was 2020, but it really has been such a milestone time for us. There's going to be so many changes that come from the past year and beyond that. So I'm curious to see just where do you think the world's going to go in the terms of work? What do you think work and the workforce will mean to the world in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
I think every generation has looked at technology, especially the last handful of them, and said, oh my God, this is going to change the way we work and we live. And there's no difference today. I don't know what work's going to be like. I don't know. I can tell you what the end state is, which is the end state is we don't work, right? And I don't know what actually happens to civilization when we get to that point. right? I mean, work is such a big part of what we do. Meaningful work. And it's not that it's not meaningful if you work on an assembly line, right? I mean, it's not that meaningful work means you have to be in a position of leadership or a position of decision making. Everybody doesn't want that. But it's in something that correlates and kind of jives with your being a little bit. So the future of work, I mean, I'm an investor and I help out a local company called High Operator, right? High Operator can make one customer service agent as, have the capacity of like 8 or 9, right? I work with manufacturing companies where like now robots are building robots to build things, right? I mean, that's been that way for a while, but it's just interesting to think about. I think the question is like work is all based around, to this point, servicing humans and human interest, right? That could be from human interest that wants to destroy the world or repair the world, to have fancy cars or to have electric cars or to have no cars, right? Whatever it ends up being. So the future of work, right, in some ways is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because like if we work less, what do we spend our time on? If our work is easier, what do we exert our energy on, right? If our work requires more of our mind share and our thoughts, what do we stop thinking about? And those are the changes I kind of think through. I mean, it's easy to sit here and be like clerical jobs, right? I can see the stats are going down, right? So secretaries have been replaced with virtual assistants, and virtual assistants will get replaced with Siri, and Siri will get replaced with, a telepathy between people, right? I mean, like at some point things will keep evolving, but I don't know what's going to happen. But the fact that the workplace itself is also changing, become more humane, is good, because when we get to the point when you don't need 8 billion people to service 8 billion people, there's going to be people that have, I mean, what happens with work is what happens with money too. I mean, some of these concepts around like basically not working and getting like a fixed minimum wage to do something supportive. It's the same ideals that FDR came out with in like the New Deal, with some of this like, support for the arts and stuff. And I hope that work becomes more creative. I hope it becomes more unique and identifiable. But this is all difficult because as work's changing, so is the world. I mean, we are really quickly becoming overpopulated. And so I don't know how this whole thing works out, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's just a crazy process. Oh, sorry, I trampled.
No, that's okay. I'm just saying I tried to take as big a scope out as much as I could on that question.
Yeah, that was perfect. And so something that you said kind of made me think of this interesting juxtaposition that I always find myself thinking about, and I'd love to get your take on it. And that's, I mean, we hear all the time that people want these more meaningful jobs now, right? Whatever that is to them, they want to feel like they're working with purpose. But at the same time, when we look at statistics, there's all this distraction in the workplace, and people are constantly doing 19,000 different things on social media and their phones and doing their work. And what do you think that will mean? I mean, how do you think the workforce in general will strike that balance of finding meaning, but also making it meaningful enough that we're not constantly distracted and thinking about 19 other things at the same time? Does technology do that? Is that a place where we step away from technology? I'd love your take on that.
Yeah, so me personally, I'm not on social media. I don't use email on my cell phone. I only have a smartphone because ACV was a mobile app, right? That's the only reason. I had a flip phone before that. And on occasion, I still keep it, and I will retreat back to it when I need to find solace. We got to decide who we want to be. The truth is, if you have a younger workforce, they're highly susceptible to just doing what is convenient, right? Like, here's where I will be like a grumpy curmudgeon-y old guy and say, like, a lot of the younger workforce is lazy. They want everything done for them. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I pull over on the side of the road and I say, what's wrong to somebody? And they go, my tire's flat. And I go, well, put your new tire on. And they go, what do you mean? And I go, it's in your trunk. It comes with your car. Right? Now look, that happens with people of every age and every demographic, and I'm not pigeonholing, a younger generation, but at some point, and I hope the point of realization comes sooner, even though humans are living longer, but you have to decide like who you want to be, right? And do you want to be somebody that's dependent on technology? Young children, the the structural, architecture of their head is changing because they're spending so much time looking down at a screen. I mean, they're actually creating these things that are almost like tails on the back of their skull. That's disgusting to me, right? But I mean, it's no more disgusting than, you see early onset arthritis in people, 100 years ago because what they were doing was such a repetitive motion, right? They're all byproducts for like a momentary lapse in awareness to what we're doing and how it's destroying us. So, I mean, look, all those distractions, we let them all in. We're all human beings. We're all born into, from a pretty silent womb into a pretty noisy world. And the quicker we realize, like, hey, I want to do stuff for me, and I gain my own sense of independence, the sooner that we start to make decisions what we want to allow in, because for whoever's listening to this, you're hearing it in English, and unless it's translated, you're probably in a free world, right? So like, you make all the decisions on what you want, and that's from the amount of effort you put into a day, to the type of work you do, to the number of social media things that you're on, to the way you communicate with your friends and stuff like that. So I don't know, those are my thoughts on it.
That's awesome. And so this will be kind of my final question before we wrap up here. But like you mentioned the physical way that we're shaped is changing because of technology. But something that we focus on a lot here, and I know Jimmy talks about a lot, is that the way that kids kind of function is changing. They're being conditioned to expect technology and expect constant engagement all the time. And so that's obviously changing as they get into the workforce. So for instance, like a big thing that happens is they use technology all day and they get constant games and fun all day in the classroom. Then they get to the workforce and there's nothing like it, right? You're just using like an old school dialer. So I'm curious to hear how you think companies will kind of adjust, and how do you think they're going to lean into that technology, or do you think we'll see a big back away from that technology and a big shift in the generation?
Look, businesses are run by humans, and humans are built to err and to fail, right? They're going to try to adopt it. Look, I mean, nobody loved, I grew up in the era when Nintendo was big, right? In the late 80s and early to mid 90s. And I used to love playing video games. And I'm a single dad. I haven't played a video game, and I love Zelda. I haven't even played, Breath of the Wild yet. And I've beat every single Zelda like 5 times. Again, this is, one of the things I worry about is technology allows you to not have to fully ripen and mature. Mm-hmm. Like, you shouldn't have to be constantly entertained. And I think that conditioning exists for some. But like some of these young founders I work with, they're like, I mentor this young woman who's a 21-year-old, very creative spirit, and like I see how tactical and rudimentary her movements are, and I really appreciate it in both the way she thinks about her startup and the way that she thinks about what she wants to do. So I wouldn't say it's across the board. Look, you put a gerbil in a cage and all there is a hamster wheel, they're going to run on a hamster wheel. I think the future of the work is figuring out how to get out of the cage, right? It's more about connectiveness. And look, competition's part of that, and a game could be part of that too. The same games that kids may be playing on their parents' cell phones. I don't let Jack touch my cell phone unless he's FaceTiming his grandparents. But, when you start to think of it, it's like, yeah, I think there's a place for it. But honestly, like all those things are just different ways to be connected, and so I think connectiveness will be something in this new workforce that we really have to focus on, because it's not going to be personal, right? Like it's not going to be demanded to be as personal. Like you see the number of companies that are remote only, or like REI just had a beautiful campus, and they're a very in-person physical type business. And they just put it up for sale. It's I forget where it is, somewhere up in the Pacific Northwest. They're like, yeah, we're going to be remote. Like, we don't need this, right? So, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. The world's moving less. I hope it's moving less on things and more on experiences. So I think different experiences, whether they're games or any other type of communication involvement, are good. But no, look, if you see somebody that's never done a push-up and they're not strong, you can build an environment for them not to be strong, or you could tell them to get on the ground and do 20, right? At some point we have to grow up and mature.
Yeah. That's an awesome insight. I really appreciated that. So last thing I want to do here is just give you a second to kind of brag a little bit, share something you're working on, something you want to share with whoever would be watching this, just so that you can have your own kind of space to talk about yourself a little.
That's kind of you. So something I'm really passionate about, which actually today's Wednesday, so it just came out this morning, is a project called Buffalo Bridge. Myself and a collection of other individuals contribute to it. Every week, it's basically our proud statement of what's going on in our community as humans, primarily the startup community. We try and announce victories that often go unnoticed for companies big and small, right? From a guy with an idea that decided to go buy $7,000 worth of equipment, even though he almost got divorced, to a company hiring their 1,000th employee and kind of exiting that startup phase, and we are trying to make it into kind of like a cultural crucible where everything gets mixed up and smashed together. And, so when you talk about this heterogeneity and the age discrepancy of different layers of the workforce, I think this literally goes to individuals that are teenagers up to, I got a couple people that are getting it there and that are in their 90s, people that are here or from here or love it here, or people that just like to see communities standing up and doing something cool. So yeah, if you get a chance, we don't even have a website, but you can get my info from this video and reach out and join it. You can be on it with 6,000 or 7,000 other people, a lot of which are founders, and everybody that's trying to make a difference.
Yeah, I know myself and our CEO, Jimmy, always read it. So
that's right. You guys have been in it. That's because you're doing the things.
I definitely say it's worth the read for sure.